The clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversations, the bass thrumming from the hidden speakers. It was a symphony of Friday night, and I, Jackson Carter, was the conductor. Not in the literal sense, of course. I wasn't orchestrating the music or directing the flow of patrons. I was simply observing. From behind the mahogany bar of the Tipsy Muse, my own creation, my own empire disguised as a dimly lit cocktail lounge, I had a front row seat to the human drama unfolding before me. I watched the couples on their first dates, their nervous laughter and tentative touches of familiar dance. I observed the groups of friends, their boisterous conversations, and shared jokes, a testament to the bonds of camaraderie. And I studied the lone wolves, nursing their drinks and their secrets, their eyes betraying a hint of loneliness, a yearning for connection. I wasn't just a bartender. I was an observer, a collector of stories, a silent witness to the ebb and flow of human emotions. It was a role I relished, a secret identity that allowed me to see the world and the people in it with a clarity that most missed. And then she walked in. She was beautiful, ambitious, and radiating that I know what I want energy, which, in her case, seemed to translate to a man with a fat bank account and a corner office. Ironic, considering she was flirting with a bartender. Her name, I soon learned, was Rachel. She was dressed to impress, her designer dress hugging her curves, her heels clicking against the polished floor with an air of confidence that bordered on arrogance. She moved through the crowd with the grace of a predator, her eyes scanning the room, assessing the potential prey. And then her gaze landed on me. I raised an eyebrow, a subtle challenge in my eyes. She smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of her lips that was both alluring and predatory. The game, I knew, had begun. "Whiskey sour," she purred, her voice a husky invitation. "No sugar." "Coming right up," I replied, my voice smooth, my expression unreadable. As I mixed her drink, our eyes met in the mirror behind the bar. Hers were filled with a calculated interest, a hunger that went beyond the simple desire for a cocktail. Mine, I suspected, betrayed a hint of amusement, a quiet awareness of the game she was playing. She took a sip of her drink, her eyes fluttering closed in appreciation. "Perfect," she murmured, her gaze lingering on mine. "Just like the bartender." I chuckled, a low rumble in my chest. "You're too kind," I said, my voice laced with a subtle irony that she missed. She leaned closer, her perfume a heady mix of expensive florals and something subtly dangerous. "So," she purred, "tell me, what does a handsome man like you do when he's not mixing drinks?" The question I knew was a test, a subtle probe to assess my worth, my potential. I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips that mirrored her own. "This and that," I replied, my voice deliberately vague. "I like to keep things interesting." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of disappointment in their depths. "Interesting," she echoed, her voice laced with a hint of skepticism. "And what, pray tell, does interesting entail?" I leaned in, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Let's just say," I murmured, "I have a few secrets." Her interest, I could tell, was piqued. The game, I realized, was about to get a whole lot more interesting. Rachel, it turned out, was a master of the subtle dig. She wouldn't outright ask about my finances or my career aspirations. No, she was far too clever for that. Instead, she'd weave these little comments into our conversations, seemingly innocuous observations that were, in reality, carefully calculated probes designed to assess my worth. She kept dropping these subtle hints, like I wouldn't notice she was fishing for information about my career prospects. I played dumb, of course. It's always more entertaining to watch the fish squirm on the hook. "It must be tough," she'd say, her voice laced with a sympathetic concern that was as genuine as a cubic zirconia. "Working nights, weekends, holidays, no time for a real life." "It has its challenges," I'd agree, polishing a glass with a practiced hand. But I enjoy it. I like the energy, the people, the atmosphere. Of course, she'd reply, her eyes scanning the room, lingering on the well-heeled patrons in the VIP lounge. But wouldn't it be nice to have a career with, you know, more potential? Potential? I'd echo, feigning ignorance. What kind of potential? Oh, she'd say, her voice vague. The kind that comes with a corner office, a company car, a substantial salary. I'd chuckle, shaking my head. Those things aren't really my priority, Rachel. I'm more interested in experiences, connections, the simple things in life. She'd smile, a tight, unconvincing smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, she'd murmur, her gaze drifting back to the VIP lounge. But a little ambition never hurt anyone, right? Ambition, huh? I'd think, suppressing a smirk. If only she knew. She'd talk about her own aspirations, her desire to climb the corporate ladder, to marry a man who could provide her with the lifestyle she craved. She'd drop names of influential people she'd met, events she'd attended, deals she was working on. It was a carefully crafted performance designed to impress, to entice, to secure her future. And I, the seemingly simple bartender, would play my role to perfection. I'd listen attentively, offering encouraging nods and the occasional, "That's impressive, Rachel." I'd share stories of my own, carefully edited to maintain the illusion of a simple, uncomplicated life. I'd talk about my passion for mixology, my love of classic literature, my dreams of traveling the world, a dream I'd already fulfilled several times over. She'd lap it up, her ego swelling with each carefully chosen word, each subtle compliment. She saw me as a safe bet, a harmless diversion, a man who was clearly smitten with her and who posed no threat to her carefully constructed plans. And I, the observer, the collector of stories, would watch her, my eyes twinkling with amusement, my mind calculating the next move in this intricate game of deception and desire. Because Rachel, in her relentless pursuit of status and wealth, had overlooked one crucial detail. She had underestimated the bartender. The shift was subtle at first, a gradual change in Rachel's demeanor that I, with my years of observing human behavior, couldn't help but notice. She started dressing differently, more high-end. The casual chic she usually sported was replaced by designer labels, the kind that screamed wealth and status. Her perfume, once a subtle hint of jasmine, became a bolder, more expensive scent, designed to attract attention. She started dressing differently, more high-end. She was also spending a lot of time on her phone, whispering and giggling. The classic signs. I'd seen it 1,000 times, just never expected to see it in my own bar. Her phone, once a mere accessory, became an extension of her hand. She was constantly texting, her fingers flying across the screen, a secretive smile playing on her lips. She'd excuse herself to take calls, her voice hushed, her conversations filled with coded language and suggestive laughter. The change in her behavior was undeniable. The focused ambition, the relentless pursuit of a man with potential, had been replaced by a distracted giddiness, a barely concealed excitement that hinted at a secret she was eager to keep. I watched her, my eyes narrowed, my mind piecing together the puzzle. The late-night calls, the whispered conversations, the sudden interest in designer labels, it all pointed to one conclusion. Rachel was seeing someone else. The realization wasn't a surprise, not exactly. I had known from the start that she was playing a game, that her interest in me was purely transactional. But still, there was a flicker of disappointment, perhaps? Or maybe it was just my ego, bruised by the realization that I had been, as they say, played. But the disappointment was quickly replaced by a cold, calculating curiosity. Who was this mystery man who had captured Rachel's attention? What kind of bait had he used to lure her away from her carefully constructed plan? And most importantly, how was I going to use this to my advantage? I continued to observe her, my eyes a silent camera, capturing her every move, her every expression. I listened to her conversations, my ears tuned to the subtle inflections in her voice, the coded language she used to conceal her infidelity. I watched her interactions with the other patrons, noting the way her eyes lingered on the men in expensive suits, the way she subtly flaunted her newfound status. And as I gathered the evidence, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, a plan began to form in my mind. A plan that was as cold and calculated as Rachel's own ambitions. Because she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated the bartender. She had mistaken my quiet observation for indifference, my patience for weakness. And she was about to learn a valuable lesson. Never underestimate a man who knows how to play the long game. The confirmation came in the form of grainy black and white footage, courtesy of the discreet security cameras I had strategically placed throughout the Tipsy Mews. It was a Wednesday night, slow compared to the usual weekend rush, which made Rachel's absence from her usual perch at the bar all the more noticeable. I'd feigned indifference, continuing to serve drinks and engage in casual banter with the other patrons, all the while keeping a watchful eye on the entrance to the VIP lounge. It was a secluded area, reserved for high rollers and those seeking a bit more privacy. Not usually Rachel's scene, unless she was with someone who fit her status and money criteria. My suspicions were confirmed when I reviewed the security footage later that night. The timestamp showed 10:43 p.m. Rachel, dressed in a slinky red dress that I'd never seen before, entered the VIP lounge with a man who reeked of expensive cologne and misplaced confidence. He was tall, with slicked back hair and a smug grin that screamed hedge fund manager or possibly used car salesman. The security footage was crystal clear. Rachel and Mr. Hedge Fund getting cozy in my VIP lounge. My lounge. The irony was almost too delicious. Almost. The footage showed them laughing, flirting, their hands straying a little too close for comfort. Then the camera angle shifted, obscuring the details, but the shadows left little to the imagination. Rachel, the woman who had lectured me about ambition and potential, was making out with another man in the VIP lounge of my own bar. My initial reaction was amusement. Not anger, not jealousy, but a quiet amusement at the sheer audacity of it all. She had been so focused on her own game, so convinced of her ability to manipulate and control, that she hadn't even considered the possibility that I might be playing a game of my own. I watched the footage again, a slow smirk spreading across my face. The irony was exquisite. Rachel, the woman who craved status and wealth, had been so blinded by her own ambition that she had failed to recognize the real power player in the room. She had chosen the flashy hedge fund guy, the one with the expensive suit and the superficial charm, over the simple bartender who, unbeknownst to her, owned the very establishment where she was flaunting her infidelity. It was a classic tale of greed and deception, a story as old as time itself, and I, Jackson Carter, the observer, the collector of stories, had a front row seat to the unfolding drama. But this wasn't just a story I was observing. This was a story I was about to rewrite. The temptation to confront Rachel was strong. To pull her aside, reveal my true identity, and watch the shock and shame wash over her face. It would have been a satisfyingly dramatic moment. But I resisted. Confrontation with its messy emotions and inevitable justifications was not my style. Confrontation is so messy, and frankly, beneath me. Revenge, on the other hand, is best served cold, and with a side of schadenfreude. I preferred a more subtle approach, a slow burn that would allow the tension to build, the anticipation to simmer, until the moment was ripe for the ultimate reveal. I would let Rachel stew in her own deception, let her believe she had gotten away with it, let her bask in the fleeting satisfaction of her conquest. And then, when she least expected it, I would strike. My plan was simple yet elegant. I would continue to play the role of the oblivious bartender, the harmless confidant, the man who was clearly smitten with her. I would let her continue her charade, her clandestine meetings with Mr. Hedge Fund, her subtle digs at my lack of ambition. And all the while, I would be gathering information, observing her every move, waiting for the perfect moment to unveil my true identity and deliver the ultimate payback. It was a game of patience, a delicate dance of deception and manipulation. But I was a master of the game, a connoisseur of human behavior, a silent predator waiting for the opportune moment to pounce. I watched Rachel, my eyes narrowed, my mind calculating the next move. She was oblivious to my awareness, her confidence growing with each passing day. She flaunted her new conquest, her expensive gifts, her whispered conversations about weekend getaways and exclusive events. She was living in a fantasy world, a world built on lies and deceit, a world that was about to come crashing down around her. And I, Jackson Carter, the man she thought was just a simple bartender, would be the one to pull the rug out from under her perfectly manicured feet. It wouldn't be a loud, dramatic confrontation. It would be a subtle shift in power, a quiet revelation that would leave her reeling, her carefully constructed world shattered into a million pieces. The calm before the storm, I knew, was always the most deceptive. But I was patient. I could wait, because the storm, when it finally broke, would be all the more devastating. And I, the architect of her downfall, would be there to witness it all, a smirk playing on my lips, a glass of my finest whiskey in my hand. Rachel was a creature of chaos, used to drama and confrontation. So the silence after her VIP lounge escapade was unsettling, a dissonant note in the symphony of her carefully orchestrated life. She was used to being the one in control, the one dictating the terms of the game. But now, the game had changed, and she was clearly off balance. She was acting jittery, constantly glancing over her shoulder, checking her phone. She was waiting for the explosion that wasn't coming. Yet, it started with the subtle signs. The way she'd flinch whenever I came near, the way her eyes darted around the room, the way she'd fumble with her phone as if expecting a call that never came. "You all right, Rachel?" I'd ask, my voice casual, my expression neutral. "Fine," she'd mumble, avoiding my gaze. "Just a lot on my mind." "Work stuff?" I'd press, knowing full well the source of her anxiety. "Yeah," she'd lie, a little too quickly. "Just stressful deadlines." The tension was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket that settled over our interactions. She was waiting for the confrontation, the inevitable accusations, the dramatic showdown that would allow her to play the victim, to justify her actions, to regain control of the narrative. But the confrontation never came. I continued to treat her as I always had. Polite, attentive, even charming. I'd pour her drinks, engage in light banter, inquire about her day, all the while observing her with a detached amusement that she mistook for ignorance. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Jax," she'd say one evening, her voice laced with a nervous tension that was almost endearing. "Just enjoying the ambiance," I'd reply, gesturing towards the bustling crowd, the clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation. "It's a good night." "Yeah," she'd agree, her eyes darting towards the entrance, as if expecting someone to appear, someone who would break the spell, someone who would finally ignite the explosion she was so desperately anticipating. But the only explosion that night was the popping of a champagne cork, a celebratory gesture for a group of friends in the VIP lounge. Rachel flinched at the sound, her eyes wide with a fear that had nothing to do with the bubbly. I watched her, a smirk playing on my lips. The anticipation was delicious, a slow burn that was far more satisfying than any immediate confrontation. She was a ticking time bomb, her anxiety growing with each passing day, her carefully constructed facade cracking under the weight of her own guilt. And I, the patient observer, the master manipulator, would be there to witness it all, to savor the moment when the truth finally came to light, and Rachel's world came crashing down around her. It was a Friday night, the bar buzzing with its usual weekend energy. Rachel, dressed in a figure-hugging black dress, sidled up to the bar, attempting a casual air that didn't quite mask the tension in her shoulders. She ordered her usual, a cosmopolitan, her eyes flitting nervously around the room as if expecting to be caught in the act. I prepared her drink, my movements deliberate, my expression unreadable. I placed the cocktail in front of her, our fingers brushing for a fleeting moment. She flinched, her eyes widening with a flicker of fear. Hope you enjoyed yourself in VIP last night, I said, my voice casual, my tone light. The look on her face was priceless, pure, unadulterated panic. It was a small jab, a subtle reminder that I knew, and that she was in deep trouble. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and fragile. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't conceal the tremor in her lips, the widening of her eyes, the frantic beating of her heart. What do you mean? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Oh, you know, I said, my eyes twinkling with amusement. The VIP lounge, the hedge fund guy, the intimate encounter. She recoiled as if I had slapped her. I don't know what you're talking about, she mumbled, her voice cracking. Don't you? I asked, raising an eyebrow. The security cameras, Rachel. They have a way of capturing everything. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, a way out of this situation. But there was none. She was trapped, caught in her own web of lies, her carefully constructed facade crumbling around her. She stammered, her mind scrambling for a plausible excuse, a way to salvage the situation, but the words wouldn't come. The truth, undeniable and damning, hung in the air between us. I watched her, my expression unreadable, my silence amplifying her panic. The moment stretched, a tense, agonizing eternity for her, a delicious anticipation for me. And then, with a choked sob, she fled. She stumbled away from the bar, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm against the polished floor, her carefully constructed composure shattering into a million pieces. I watched her go, a slow smirk spreading across my face. The first blow had been struck, the first crack in her armor revealed. And I, the patient predator, the master of the game, knew that this was just the beginning. The tipsy muse had a way of whispering secrets. It wasn't just the dim lighting or the hushed conversations that created the atmosphere. It was the people. The regulars, the staff, even the occasional first-timer, they all seemed to possess an innate understanding of the unspoken rules, the subtle hierarchies, the power dynamics that flowed beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary bar. And now those whispers were swirling around me. Jackson Carter, the man who had been for so long invisible. The whispers started subtly. He's not just a bartender, you know. He owns the place. He owns all the places. The realization was dawning on her, slowly but surely, and the panic was intensifying. Rachel, her senses heightened by guilt and a growing unease, started to notice the shift. The casual familiarity with which I interacted with the staff, the deference with which the regulars greeted me, the way even the most arrogant of the VIP patrons seemed to hold back a certain respect in my presence. He's not just a bartender, you know, she overheard one of the regulars saying to a newcomer, his voice a hushed, conspiratorial tone. Oh yeah? The newcomer replied, his eyebrows raised in surprise. What else does he do? He owns the place, the regular said, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. And not just this one. He owns a whole string of bars and clubs across the city. Made his fortune in the business, they say. Rachel's eyes widened, her mind reeling. She glanced at me, her gaze lingering on my hands as I effortlessly mixed a cocktail. The movements fluid, practiced, the confidence of a man who knew his craft. Could it be true? Was this simple bartender more than he seemed? The whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent, weaving a tapestry of intrigue around me. Did you hear? One of the waitresses confided to a group of patrons, her voice a hushed gossip. Jack's just closed a major deal, some big-shot investor. Apparently he's expanding his empire. No way, one of the patrons exclaimed. He's loaded then? Loaded? The waitress scoffed. Honey, he's practically royalty in this city, owns half the nightlife scene, they say. Rachel listened, her heart pounding in her chest. She watched me, her eyes searching for a clue, a sign that would confirm or deny the rumors. But I remained impassive, my expression unreadable, my movements betraying nothing of the power I held. The realization was dawning on her, slowly but surely, like a sunrise creeping over the horizon. The man she had dismissed as a simple bartender, the man she had used and betrayed, was not who she thought he was. He was Jackson Carter, the owner, the entrepreneur, the man who held the keys to the very world she craved to be a part of. And the panic, the fear, the overwhelming sense of regret was intensifying with every whispered word, every knowing glance, every subtle gesture of respect that was directed towards me. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, the kind where the regulars outnumbered the tourists, and the atmosphere was more intimate, more conducive to observation. Rachel, her nerves still frayed from the whispers and the growing suspicion of my true identity, sat at the bar, nursing a glass of wine, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped bird. I was polishing glasses, my movements deliberate, my mind focused on the next stage of my plan. I had left a document on the counter, seemingly carelessly, a contract with the heading Carter Holdings in bold letters. It was a prop, of course, a carefully orchestrated piece of theater designed to deliver the final blow. Rachel, unable to resist the lure of the forbidden, her curiosity piqued by the whispers and the growing unease, glanced at the document. Her eyes scanned the page, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the name that had been haunting her thoughts, the name that was synonymous with wealth, power, and success in this city, Jackson Carter. The contract was just a prop, a little theatrical touch, but it served its purpose. The blood drained from her face. The color returned in the form of a deep crimson blush of shame. She finally understood. She had messed with the wrong bartender. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and fragile. Then the color returned, flooding her cheeks with a deep crimson blush of shame. Her eyes widened, her lips parted in a silent gasp, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and regret. She looked at me, her gaze filled with a newfound understanding, a dawning horror of the magnitude of her miscalculation. The man she had dismissed as a simple bartender, the man she had used and betrayed, was the very man she had been trying so desperately to impress, to capture, to secure her future with. The irony was not lost on me. I watched her, my expression impassive, my eyes betraying nothing of the satisfaction I felt. She had played the game, and she had lost. And now, she was facing the consequences. She tried to speak, to apologize, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. The shame, the guilt, the overwhelming realization of her own folly choked her voice, leaving her speechless. I continued polishing the glasses, my movements deliberate, my silence amplifying her discomfort. The moment stretched, an eternity for her, a delicious victory for me. And then, unable to bear the weight of her own humiliation, she fled. She stumbled away from the bar, her head bowed, her shoulders slumped, her carefully constructed facade shattered into a million pieces. I watched her go, a slow smirk spreading across my face. The revelation had been made, the truth unveiled. And Rachel, the woman who had craved status and wealth, had been brought down by her own shallow ambition, her own inability to see beyond the surface. The game, I realized, was far from over, but this was a crucial victory, a turning point that would set the stage for the final act, the ultimate payback. The invitation was the talk of the town, an exclusive event at the Tipsy Muse, hosted by Jackson Carter himself. A chance to rub shoulders with the city's elite, to sip champagne with celebrities, to experience the legendary hospitality of the man who had built a nightlife empire. Rachel, desperate to reclaim her lost status, to prove that she still belonged in this world of wealth and privilege, was determined to attend. But there was one problem. She wasn't invited. The guest list was carefully curated. Rachel's name was conspicuously absent. The bouncers, bless their loyalty, followed my instructions to the letter. Sorry, VIP is for people who actually belong here. The night of the event, the Tipsy Muse was transformed. The usual dim lighting was replaced by a warm, inviting glow. Floral arrangements adorned every surface, their fragrance mingling with the scent of expensive perfume and anticipation. The air buzzed with excitement, the clinking of champagne flutes a symphony of celebration. Rachel, dressed in her most expensive gown, her hair styled to perfection, arrived at the entrance, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She approached the velvet rope, her eyes scanning the crowd for a familiar face. A way in. Name? The bouncer asked, his voice gruff, his expression impassive. Rachel, she said, her voice a little too high, her smile a little too bright. Rachel, she faltered, realizing she didn't have a last name to offer. She had always been Rachel, the beautiful, ambitious woman who needed no further introduction. But tonight, that wasn't enough. The bouncer consulted his list, his finger tracing the names, stopping at a deliberate blank space where Rachel's name should have been. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said, his voice firm. Your name's not on the list. There must be some mistake, Rachel pleaded, her voice laced with desperation. I know, Jax. We're friends. The bouncer remained unmoved. I'm just following orders, ma'am, he said, his eyes fixed on a point beyond her shoulder. No list, no entry. Rachel's face flushed with shame and anger. She tried to push past the velvet rope, but the bouncer's arm, strong and unyielding, blocked her path. Please, she begged, her voice cracking. I need to see Jax. It's important. The bouncer, sensing a potential scene, signaled to his colleague. Look, lady, he said, his voice low and menacing. I'm not going to ask you again. Step aside. Rachel, defeated and humiliated, retreated from the entrance, her dreams of mingling with the elite, of reclaiming her lost status, shattered against the impenetrable wall of the guest list. I watched her from the shadows, a smirk playing on my lips. The invitation, or rather the lack thereof, was the first step in my plan, a subtle reminder that the rules of the game had changed. Rachel, the woman who had craved access to this world, was now on the outside looking in, her exclusion a public declaration of her fall from grace. Rachel, her pride wounded and her ambitions thwarted, was not one to accept defeat gracefully. The next evening she returned to the Tipsy Muse, her eyes red-rimmed, her expression a mixture of defiance and desperation. She marched straight up to the bar, ignoring the curious stares of the other patrons, and planted herself in front of me. Jax, she began, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and suppressed tears. We need to talk. I raised an eyebrow, my expression carefully neutral. We do? I asked, my voice smooth, betraying nothing of the satisfaction I felt at her obvious distress. Yes, she insisted, her voice rising. About last night. About the invitation. Ah, yes, I said, a slow smirk spreading across my face. The invitation, or rather the lack thereof. It was a mistake, she blurted out, her voice cracking. A misunderstanding. I didn't know. The I didn't know defense, classic, as if ignorance somehow absolved her of her shallow, opportunistic behavior. It was almost endearing, almost. I leaned back against the bar, my arms crossed, my eyes fixed on hers. Didn't know what, Rachel? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. That I own this place? That I own a dozen other places just like it? That I'm not the simple bartender you thought I was? She flinched at my words, her carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of her own deceit. I didn't realize, she stammered, her eyes darting around the room, seeking an escape from my unwavering gaze. If you had known, I interrupted, my voice rising. If you had known, what, Rachel? Would you have treated me differently? Would you have showered me with the same attention, the same fake affection, the same calculated charm you reserved for the men in expensive suits? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The truth, undeniable and damning, hung in the air between us. She had been exposed, her shallow ambition laid bare, her opportunistic behavior revealed for all to see. "You played a game, Rachel," I said, my voice low and menacing. "And you lost. You chose the hedge fund guy, the one with the flashy car and the empty promises. You chose status and wealth over genuine connection, over respect, over me." I paused, letting my words sink in, watching the shame and regret wash over her face. "And now," I continued, my voice hardening, "you're paying the price. You're on the outside looking in, excluded from the very world you crave to be a part of. And that, my dear, is your own doing." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger, humiliation, and a flicker of something else, something that looked suspiciously like respect. But it was too late. The damage had been done, the trust broken, the game played and lost. I turned away from her, signaling to one of the waitresses. "Another drink for the lady?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. Rachel shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No," she said, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I think I've had enough." And with that, she turned and walked away, her shoulders slumped, her head bowed, her dreams of wealth and status replaced by the bitter taste of regret. The tipsy muse and the world it represented closed its doors to Rachel that night. Word of her humiliation spread like wildfire through the city's social circles, the whispers turning into snide remarks, the invitations drying up like a desert oasis. She was ostracized, shunned, her carefully curated image tarnished beyond repair. The hedge fund guy, the one she had so foolishly chosen, had moved on to his next conquest, leaving her with nothing but a bruised ego and a collection of designer handbags that were now a mocking reminder of her misplaced ambition. Her career stalled, her social life evaporated, and the dreams she had so relentlessly pursued seemed to slip through her fingers like grains of sand. She found herself alone, adrift in a sea of indifference, the very people she had sought to impress, now turning their backs on her, their laughter echoing in the empty spaces of her life. The parties, the galas, the exclusive events that had once been her playground were now closed to her, the doors guarded by the invisible but impenetrable walls of social status. And in the quiet solitude of her lonely apartment, stripped of the distractions and the superficial validation she had craved, Rachel finally had time to reflect. She thought about Jax, the man she had dismissed as a simple bartender, the man she had used and betrayed. She remembered his quiet confidence, his subtle strength, the way he had looked at her, not with the hungry eyes of a predator, but with the gentle amusement of an observer, a man who saw through her facade, who recognized her true worth, or rather, the lack thereof. She learned a valuable lesson that night. Respect isn't something you earn by climbing the social ladder. It's something you give freely, regardless of status or wealth, and she had learned it the hard way. The realization hit her like a wave, washing away the layers of pretense, the carefully constructed image she had presented to the world. She saw herself, not as the ambitious, successful woman she had pretended to be, but as a shallow, opportunistic climber who had valued status and wealth over genuine connection, over respect, over love. And in that moment of clarity, she understood. She had made a mistake, a terrible, irreversible mistake. She had chosen the wrong path, the wrong man, the wrong life. And now, she was paying the price. The regret was a bitter pill to swallow, a constant ache in her heart, a reminder of the opportunity she had squandered, the love she had rejected. She thought about Jax, his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, the way he had looked at her not with judgment but with a quiet understanding that transcended her shallow ambitions. And she knew, with a certainty that cut deeper than any social ostracism, that she had lost something precious, something irreplaceable. She had lost the chance to be with a man who saw her, not for her social status or her potential wealth, but for who she truly was, flaws and all. The lesson was a harsh one, but a valuable one. Respect, she realized, wasn't something you earned by climbing the social ladder. It was something you gave freely, regardless of status or wealth. And she had learned it the hard way, at the cost of her reputation, her social standing, and her chance at a genuine connection with a man who was truly worthy of her.